This episode of Super GG Radio is brought to you by our Patreon. Patrons of the show can get our Dogs of Super GG Radio newsletter, Super GG Radio stickers to slap on your closest PC or bag, input on what we cover, game nights with the hosts, and even a chance to win a copy of an indie we talked about. Not only that, but 90% of all patron contributions go to the Children's Miracle Network of Hospitals. Visit patreon.com/superggradio to learn more.
What's good, Internet, and welcome to a special session of Super GG Radio, where friends chat about video games and all things adjacent. This time around, we're flying with just the two of us, I guess. I'm your host, Eric Getty Gettinger, and with me is Alec Barks.
Just the two of us? Oh no, it's all gonna burn down to the ground.
Right, I thought so at first, too. But I guess it's because Alex and Joel are at something called Gamescom. So we're going rogue. We're going crazy this week. And I decided that we're still going to have a mini feature here. We're going to talk about Final Fantasy for a little bit. I know that we're just a few weeks away from the release of Final Fantasy 16, but if we look back, Final Fantasy is huge. So for them to make it to 16, it's kind of crazy, right?
It is, especially when you consider all the times the games have been remade as well.
Yeah, we're not even... I don't even think we're going to talk too much about the remakes. We'll probably touch on them, but just the sheer volume of content that they've been able to put out through the years is insane. And this is coming from a studio that... the reason why it was called Final Fantasy, if the story holds true, is because it was their last attempt at a game, trying to put something out there and just hoping that it's going to take off.
Yeah, that's the rumor I've heard about its origin as well.
So, and then for us to, that was it's over 30 years, yeah?
Yeah, 1987.
Yeah, because we're already looking at all of the new hotness that came out this year already with the Pixel Remaster Collection physical copy.
Woo-hoo. For those of us who haven't already been mainlining it.
That's what I wanted to jump into. So, obviously, we could go, and I'm sure that we could take up 2-3 hours and talk about every single one of the Final Fantasies, but Alec, you have been playing the remasters as they came out over the last year or so?
Yeah, 2 years ago is when they released digitally on Steam.
All right. And then more recently, you got your physical copy, and they brought it over to, I believe that it was most of the major consoles, but...
No, it was just Switch and PlayStation.
Okay. What? Xbox doesn't exist?
Nope.
Yeah. That's usually how it goes. But I digress. We're here to talk about Final Fantasy tonight. So you've been playing them. You jumping around, I imagine, with the story. But first 6 games got this fancy new coat of paint. And how have you felt about the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters?
So I have a big nostalgia feel for Final Fantasy 1 and Final Fantasy 5 and 6.
Mm-hmm.
Final Fantasy V was the first game that I had to... I emulated and had to fake with some Japanese because it wasn't translated, so it was all fans doing it.
Okay.
So to get this in its original form, fully translated on the Pixel remaster was just... made me giddy.
All right. I like to hear that. So between the 3 that you mentioned, do you have a favorite, one that you always go back to?
Oh, Final Fantasy VI for certain. That one has the best story, in my opinion, of the first 6.
Okay.
It has the best villain, someone who is actually evil instead of just circumstantially bad.
What? You're not talking about Kefka, are you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because Final Fantasy 1, you've got your big bad is Chaos, but you don't really see him working until the very last battle. And he blames it all on you. It's a big time loop idea.
Yeah.
Which was pretty cool for the time. Final Fantasy II is a revolution, and so you're fighting against a kingdom that is oppressing people.
Okay.
Final Fantasy III, I don't remember who the big bad was.
See, that's my gap right there. Final Fantasy III was not originally released in the US, and we really didn't get it in hand until it was a little bit ago. I believe that it came out for one of the Nintendo handheld platforms to start, and there was a kind of a hubbub about it because this was something that, not all of the games back in the day would come to the US, so for us to finally have it, kind of cool. But because of that, I never got to play it.
Yeah, it came out on the Nintendo DS in 2006.
Ooh. And that's, man, we're already 2023. It feels like it's been forever. Maybe we'll play it someday. Now that there's a Pixel remaster, maybe I should just buy it.
Well, what was really cool about this one is this was the first game where they introduced the class system. You were going to different crystals, collecting their powers, and unlocking different classes different jobs that would play differently. You had your ninja, your black mage, your white mage, things that you come to expect, and then you have some odd ones out there too. I can't think of them all off the top of my head though. The Onion Knight was really the weirdest one.
The Onion Knight, yeah, I'm trying to grasp at some straws here too, but was it when Geomancer, one of them? Something that I don't think that I expected, or maybe that wasn't until a little bit later.
Yeah, Geomancer I know is in Final Fantasy V.
Right. But, yeah, so anyway, the introduction of the class system is kind of interesting because we see it as the series progresses, and it'll come back and it'll disappear. But the real place where it's found a home, and I don't intend for us to cover either of these games for very long, but the MMOs. So,
I was thinking Final Fantasy Tactics was where it found a true home.
Final Fantasy Tactics is a great example, but the ability to switch classes like that, especially with the MMO platform, it allows you to have a little bit more diversity in what you're doing. So you don't have to specialize in one specific class. And don't get me wrong, because Final Fantasy Tactics in itself, I would argue, is in my top 5 all-time Final Fantasy games. Because,
absolutely.
Yeah, because you're able to do that, but there's also other characters that you get, and the story is so in-depth. But the story is why I always come back to these games. But I think I already started to go off on a tangent very briefly between 4 and 5. So anything to note? Anything that you want to toss out there for 4 and 5?
4 did come out in the States. It was released as Final Fantasy II on the Super Nintendo. Mm-hmm. And that one had the first time where you actually had party members die and swap out throughout the game. Yep. And then 5 was a reintroduction to the class system with the crystals, and that had spanned 3 worlds, which was really cool at the time.
Yeah. Going back to 4, that was one of my favorites growing up because of what you mentioned, characters swapping out. You didn't see that too much in games back then either. The idea of losing a character or them dying and then it completely being removed from what you're able to do. But those characters were also really unique in the way that Cecil goes from being this Dark Knight into a Paladin. So there was more depth of character in it, as opposed to, when you go back to Final Fantasy 1, where it's just neat and clean, everybody's their own class that you selected at the beginning, and you play through it like that. And then, it gets a little bit more in-depth, but I feel like 4 was one of the major turning points when it came to developing a bigger story.
Yeah, 4 and 6 were the big storytellers. 5 did not have... It had a story, but it wasn't as story-driven. It was crystal-driven.
Yeah. So crystals being one of those magical elements that you find in a lot of the Final Fantasy games, whether you're moving to protect them or, in some cases, destroy them, but they generally make an appearance somewhere. Where? You have to play and find out. So, falling to Final Fantasy VI, it is right on the edge of when we start to get into 3D. There are some scenes. We have the introduction of some cutscenes in this game, as well as some of the crazier just elements that they did with the series. Specifically, I can never get enough of the opera scene.
Oh, yes. And to have it in the Pixel Remaster in full lyrical goodness.
Yep.
Ooh.
So, that you mentioned that, all of the music has been redone for these Final Fantasy pixels, yeah?
Yes. They're full orchestral pieces.
Okay. So, having been a big fan of the series for a long time, and I dragged Joel and Alex along to go to one of the Distant Worlds concerts, you don't think about it until you're there sitting through it, but those pieces of art, and I think we can both agree that the series of Final Fantasy in its entirety is art in some fashion.
Absolutely.
But the music was originally created for the system, and it was just beeps and boops. So for somebody to then sit down and have to translate every little note into sheet music is an incredible feat, and it goes to show you that there's a deep passion that people have for this series and creating that and recreating it so that it can go on. It's crazy.
And now we have canon pieces for the first 6 games.
Yeah. So this is pretty exciting. Now, we could go on about the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters, and there's plenty of time to do so, but as I want to keep this a little bit shorter, I want to highlight the move to 3D. So, the move to 3D happened from 6 to 7. Again, we were right on the cusp of it with Final Fantasy VI, but Final Fantasy VII, you have these rendered characters that are now walking around in a different environment. Different things that you get to see, and for the better or worse, it takes a different shape, and it evolves, like most video games of the time. But one of the crazier comparisons is, you think back, Final Fantasy VII and 8 both came out for the PlayStation 1.
Right.
No disagreement there. But the level of detail that you had from Final Fantasy VII to Final Fantasy VIII is kind of stark in a lot of ways.
And what's really crazy is those games were only released 2 years apart.
Right? So it kind of tells you that they were pretty sure at some point. They're like, all right, Final Fantasy VII, this is a sure thing, right? So then they started to work on 8. And again, it went from 2D turn-based combat. We're still turn-based at this point in 7 and 8, but now we've got more rendering, some bigger environments, but also more interactables and people moving around that are fully rendered as well. It's crazy to think about how far they were already at that point. So we're talking the matter of about, that was 12, 13 years?
Yeah.
Because it was towards the end of almost 2000, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So, and then things seemed to slow down for Final Fantasy for a little bit. And we have, obviously, 9, which in itself, also PlayStation 1 game, and it just gets crazier from there.
It does.
we took 3 games in that generation of the PlayStation, and then we jumped to Final Fantasy X, which was on PlayStation 2.
Right.
And 11, which was
on PlayStation 2.
Yeah, it was also on PlayStation 2.
And on Windows, yeah.
So it was a real journey for a couple, and again, it slowed down, and the game changed. It fundamentally changed in a lot of ways as we moved on from 10 to 11. So up until 10, we're still looking at turn-based combat. You know, they added this thing called the sphere grid, which allowed you to level up your characters in more of a fashion that you did or didn't have to follow the rules of the game. Normally, leveling up always included you get enough XP, and then your character gets a little bit stronger. Right.
With the exception, there are 2 notable exceptions, Final Fantasy II and Final Fantasy VIII.
Mm-hmm.
Those ones, well, Final Fantasy II didn't even have levels.
Yes.
In Final Fantasy VIII, the monsters scaled to your level, but most of your stat increases came from the newly introduced junction system.
Yes, and collecting magic in order to equip it so that your character could get stronger in a specific area. So you could tailor the characters how you wanted. But there was still the XP in Final Fantasy VIII, and the skill ups, like the amount that your skills would actually increase, was minimal. Like, it was baseline, because it was the idea that your characters are all human, and the way that they're able to complete these fantastic actions is through the use of the junctions. There's plenty of ways that we can gripe and complain about the junction system, or even the bits of story of Final Fantasy VIII as it gets pretty ridiculous. I would still argue that the more that you look back on the Final Fantasy series, it's all kind of ridiculous.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Final Fantasy VI, you can suplex a train.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic and also terrifying at the same time. But, you know, in all of the craziness that we see in the Final Fantasy series, there's usually some consistency. That's why it got weird for me when we moved to from 10 to 11. Because when we hit 11, your turn-based combat is kind of there, but it's also not. So the gambit system. How can we talk about...
Well, 11 was the MMO.
Oh, 11 was the... 12 was the... Yeah.
Yep.
I'm getting ahead of myself. So 11, yeah. We're not going to talk about MMOs.
You've got your general MMO conceits. You've got cooldown timers, which kind of synthesizes turn-based combat and things like that.
Yeah.
But I didn't play it long enough to talk really much more than that on it.
No, and neither did I. At the time, sure, but there's just something about MMOs at that point where if I was going to play anything, it was going to be World of Warcraft.
Yep.
Everything else be damned. I mean, but that's what everybody else was playing, so I can't really fault this game in particular. So we'll jump over to 12, and I was already kind of hinting at 12 anyway, with the Gambit system. So the Gambit system is this kind of wonky thing which allows you to still have an active timer, and then your character will act when it's their turn. But you can set it up so you don't even have to play the game if you don't want to. Like you just,
it was very breakable.
Yeah, point your character in the direction, set up the Gambit system, and then they do all of the fighting, the healing, and whatever you want them to, and that was it. But it also broke my heart. Partially because of the Gambit system, but the other thing, up until Final Fantasy XII, there was a lot of enjoyment. There was a lot of things that I had come to expect. The uniqueness of the characters and the individual limit breaks. That moment that the character would attain like a Super Saiyan level just for a second, or, you know, Trance was a little bit longer, but just long enough so that they would do something incredible. And Final Fantasy XII was like, well, you know what? Everybody's kind of interchangeable, so there's no unique ability that we're going to give each individual person. And I felt like that was rude.
Right, it takes some of the individuality out of the characters, some of that bit that you cared about who you were actually playing with.
Mm-hmm. And even, I thought that 10 did it very well. So to go from 10, which has very specific skills that each of the characters can have, and, you know, the sphere grid allowed you to branch out and obtain different skills for your characters, but then to go to 12, which has your board, this skill board, and you use your job points, but it's all the same for everybody.
Right, and you have to do it for every single thing. Like, oh, you want to equip hats? Gotta spend some job points.
I don't want to spend job points. I should be able to put on whatever hat I want.
It's just a hat. How do I do it wrong?
It's just a hat. You can't tell me that hat with the feather in it is different from the leather hat. It costs 24 more job points so that I know how to wear it. Oh, that's a negative moment in my Final Fantasy experience, was when we get to 12. Alec, when did you eventually fall off of the series for a bit?
I started falling off it at 12 because that's when they got rid of the turn-based combat.
Okay.
And I'm going to be the grumpy old man and go, oh, that's not my Final Fantasy anymore. Which, it's hard to do that too, because I really wanted to like it since it was set in the same world as Tactics.
Yes. So there aren't too many instances in Final Fantasy where you're coming back to the same world. Until recently. But back then, it was like, oh, here's all of these other separate worlds, each one of them set aside, different. And then they're like, oh, we'll go to the world of Final Fantasy Tactics. And, you know, it's fun, but at the same time, it's like, why did you do this to me? And if you look at Final Fantasy Tactics, the original one, because as you go into the other ones that came out for the advanced, I think 3DS, you have just the human saga that's going on, but there's other races of people that exist.
Right, they're all the monstrous races and everything.
Yeah, you don't even touch on those in the original Final Fantasy Tactics, but they're there, and you eventually see them. So that just goes to show you, like, the little chunk of the world that Final Fantasy Tactics took up still had so much story to tell. I love it, but Final Fantasy XII, not my favorite. So
I think it is low on a lot of people's listing of all the games.
There's a lot that I would rank higher, but we get into a kind of the weird section of Final Fantasy where you said that you dropped off probably because we switch over to the PlayStation 3 once we hit Final Fantasy. Reason. Yeah, Final Fantasy 13. And Final Fantasy 13, being that it is the solo game that was released. Well, okay, so I probably shouldn't say that because that's going to move me on to my next main point of the night. But what's a number between a Final Fantasy? It's usually not a sequel, right?
Right.
So you go more or less sequential. You get a second game from Final Fantasy X. Okay.
Right.
Take it or leave it, what have you. Final Fantasy 13, your main line, and then you get a couple of other stories. Again, probably not the best, but still additions to the story. A Final Fantasy 13 following very different, very diverse cast of characters as they all fight against a higher power. This was cool, and a lot of people, I think, took it the wrong way because in the previous Final Fantasy iterations, you're looking at more or less open worlds. You got some good opportunities to take side quests, to adventure, to explore. 13 was railroad. You are on the railroad until darn near the end, and then it was like, oh, guess what? Now you can go back to wherever you want. And did you want to? Your tutorial for this lasted, I want to say, 10, 15 hours into the game.
Ooh.
Are you not familiar with this?
No, not
okay.
that much. That's
really
into the game. And here I am complaining about Like a Dragon.
It's, well, you still got a while to go in Like a Dragon, but you have your characters in Final Fantasy, but they slowly, and it's very, very slowly, introduce the elements of it. 13, you get a couple of characters, you get introduced to how to switch weapons, how to use their level up system in this, because it again was not the normal method. You had these different crystals that you could grow, and for all of its faults, the characters were still the showcase in 13.
Okay.
But just the slow, laborious nature of getting to the point where you have the freedom, that was a killer for a lot of people. After that point, it's enjoyable, but there are also some weird, or I would almost call them hinky things about the game. The timer system on the battles, you want to minimize the amount of time you spend in a battle, and you get a better grade. What does that mean? Man, I don't know. But it's in there.
Sounds like maybe break it as fast as possible.
Yeah. But why is it in there? To this day, they might have told me maybe greater rewards for completing it faster. But I wasn't about to go back and do that last boss fight, multiple times to get a 5-star rating on it.
Ooh.
Final Fantasy bosses, especially the end ones, are meant to be a little ridiculous. So then after 13 and all of its counterparts, 10, so we have 10, 10-2, 13 parts 2 and 3, we make it over to the next MMO, which failed and then was resurrected and is still thriving today.
Yeah, it's available on pretty much every major platform, except for Xbox, because who cares about that?
I'm pretty sure you could play that on Xbox. At least that one. But still very much a rebirth from what they originally put out. Realizing and pivoting like that takes a lot of guts, and to make it a profitable game is crazy to me. A lot of the studios, a lot of developers would just quit or let it die. Try and forget about it. But they went all in on it, and to this day, they're still able to turn a profit on 14. But it's a MMO. It's a service game, so people are paying for that.
Which is really kind of cool that there's also still a wealth of free content to it as well for people who haven't played.
Yeah. If you choose to go in and try it, I highly recommend it. And that's one of those games where you're able to switch your classes and, be nice to your friends, maybe heal once in a while.
Maybe.
I
have switched my class so many times.
just to heal, all right? We just need a healer. All right. Moving on to the last one before what we have coming up later this month, Final Fantasy 15. Final Fantasy 15, I guess we could talk about 7, maybe. We'll figure it out. Because there's a couple of 7s, but Final Fantasy 15, what we fondly call the Chocobros, because it's the story of Noctis and his journey, but he has his Kingsguard with him, and the relationships that the characters build is definitely, once again, one of the key things to look for in that game. And it's heartbreaking at times as you see what occurs. But the combat in this becomes even more action-oriented than we had before. In 13, there was a turn-based element to it. When we jump to 15, it is, how else to describe it except very Kingdom Hearts-esque.
So it's gone straight action RPG at this point.
It's action RPG. You still have some of the elements where you can take a second to, thumb through and find the summon that you're going to use. But for the most part, you are going in, you're using your buttons to attack, and you're just going crazy. Especially with the way that Noctis zips around. He can throw his weapon and then basically teleport to it. And that was one of the cool things about it. But again, combat very much became action. And I have to say, it's definitely showing of the time where people aren't as interested, or maybe it didn't test as well, to have it be that turn-based RPG. Not to say that there isn't use for it, but looking at this game, they jumped into a completely different format than a lot of what was used in the past. And I know that I think that was one of the main criticisms that you had, Alec.
Always. I mean, ever since 12.
Yeah. So, again, this isn't my Final Fantasy, but it kind of is. You still got the name Final Fantasy on it. You still have the series has elements that you'll see in it that you'll know, and you'll be like, okay, yeah, that makes it a Final Fantasy game. Some of the characters that you don't think about are the summons. The summons are the characters that continually are there for you from one game to the next. If you're summoning, so if you think about it, we have summoners all the way back in Final Fantasy. I think in Final Fantasy 4, right? We have a summoner.
We have a summoner in 4, definitely. We might have one in 3 as well. I don't remember all the jobs.
Okay, so as early back, it may have been 3. Don't quote us on this. We're not professional podcasters. But at least that far back. So that means characters that you know. You've got Ifrit, Shiva, you've got Odin, just to name some of the more popular ones. But they carry over. You see them continuously throughout the course of the series. Yeah, these are not mainline. They're not your heroes of the story, but they're there.
Very true. I suppose my big problem, with these, I wouldn't have a problem if they went the direction of, Stranger of Paradise.
See, Stranger of Paradise is so unique and weird.
Well, but they didn't say it's not a numbered Final Fantasy.
Right, but I'm glad that you brought it up, because in a way, it's Final Fantasy 1.
In a way.
In a way. In the most, I don't want to swear, but I want to say the most bastardized way, it's Final Fantasy 1. If you shove the square into the triangle enough, you might chip the edges and get it in there. That's kind of what
goes in the square hole.
But yeah, what's your experience? Did you get to play Stranger of Paradise?
I have not yet. I've been waiting for it to go on sale on Steam.
Okay, what do you know about it?
All I really know is that it's either a retelling or something of Final Fantasy 1.
Okay, I think that's fair. I think we can leave it with that. But I just want to throw out there, having played it and knowing what it's all about, they take more or less the story of Final Fantasy 1, but introduce these characters that can switch jobs on the fly, tons of equipables, and it is like a Souls game.
Ooh.
So it's not the toughest Souls game that I've ever played, but there are some frustrating parts because, you'll feel like you're in a good way. You're like, yeah, I'm really smoking this. I know what I'm doing. And then you'll hit a wall and you'll be like, man, I gotta go back and reconsider a lot of the approach that I've taken up until this point. And the characters, you have your main one, and then the other ones will act as support. But it's fun. The story is just bonkers. There's stuff that they put in there that doesn't make any sense. In the opening scene, pretty sure he has like a Zune. Like those of you who don't know what a Zune is, it's a little media player. Now we just listen to music on our phones, and we don't even listen to music. We stream anything. We stream Netflix as we walk around. But yeah, back in the day when, we grew up with Walkmans to some capacity, but now you've got a digital media player at your fingertips at any moment in the day. Stranger Paradise being another Final Fantasy game that's not part of the numbered series, but still, it's there, whether you like it or not. Okay. So we touched on all of the numbered games. I don't know that we need to go back to 7. 7 has a lot going for it, and there's even more coming supposedly later this year. We'll see how that goes. But for me, I think we've covered a good amount. I'm confident in what we've done, but what I want to know, Alec, is you must have one or two moments of the Final Fantasy series that stick with you and that you want people to experience.
Oh, man. So Final Fantasy VII has that first, I don't know that there's a way people can experience, and it's not spoilers anymore, but the death of Aerith for that first time.
Yep.
Because this was really the first game with those animated cutscenes that we had. Mm-hmm. The YouTube wasn't a thing, so there were no spoilers out there.
Yep.
And it just happens, and what?
Yeah, you made a very valid point. There was no YouTube to wreck it. You didn't have to worry about going on Facebook and seeing 17 different spoilers, or the way that you would get a review back then is print.
Yep.
And maybe if you're lucky, you have access to the internet and somebody's written a review, but you still have to actively go to the review to see what it's about. Very good point.
And part of that, too, just comes with the changing of technology that we experienced from playing Final Fantasy I as children to 7 as teens. Mm-hmm. And being present for those technological evolutions. I don't know what could possibly come in any game that isn't old hat. Things are just expected to have cutscenes nowadays.
Yep. And if you don't, what are you even doing? Right. It's a stylistic choice for games if they're not going to have it. And there's some games that play more or less like a cutscene.
Oh, yes.
And I've subjected you guys to those in previous years. The Dark Pictures and the like, those are games that very much are there to take you on a ride. And I feel that whether we like it or not, that's the same direction that Final Fantasy XVI is going to take us here into the future. Besides that moment of Final Fantasy VII, and like you said, it's hard to qualify it as a spoiler anymore, knowing that the new Final Fantasy VII, this remake, remaster, rebirth that's come out, is taking a separate path down that story. So is it canon anymore? Who knows?
I mean, I haven't played Final Fantasy VII Remake, mm-hmm. So from what I understand, it's an alternate universe, and Sephiroth is trying to change the way things happened to remake 7.
Yeah, more or less. So,
okay.
So what's real anymore?
Right,
nobody
exactly.
knows. Any other moments that you wanted to share?
No, I can't think of anything that really stands out as just, oh my god, moments. Maybe, so I missed Final Fantasy IV initially. I jumped straight from Final Fantasy 1 to Final Fantasy 6.
Yeah.
So the very first time I summoned anything with an Esper was just, oh man.
Yeah. It's a pretty freaking cool experience to have that power, or even that first time that you get a limit break.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are a lot of firsts that they've got to do something really game-changing with the mechanics for people to have that experience now.
I'm hoping that that's what we'll get to see. There's still a lot of hype around Final Fantasy 16. For me, that moment, I think it's because I was there in my life, those angsty teen years. But for Final Fantasy 8, the just confusing and emotional way that Squall is, I was like, man, this guy's so cool. But then him like realizing like, hey, I don't have to be tough all the time. I got friends. So that was a journey for me. I thought it was right where I needed to be in my life.
Very nice. Yeah, 8 had some great storytelling.
And then, it went completely crazy towards the end, and it was nonsensical, but when isn't a Final Fantasy game nonsensical?
Especially at the end.
Yeah, it's designed to be that way. The other thing was the journey in Final Fantasy 15. As you are accompanied by your Kingsguard, and then to see the difference in opinion and the heartache that happens as you get further and further in, it was something that you need to experience. And I'm not going to spoil that one because maybe there's a alternate reality where Alec is going to go back and he's going to try FF15 one of these days.
Maybe. It'll happen when Alex pays out his PlayStation 5s that he owes everybody.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure that he'll also hand you over a used VR set at that point.
There we go.
So that's all that I really wanted to cover as far as the series tonight. I know that the hype for 16 is real, and I'm definitely going to want to talk about it on the main podcast, but I thought we'd just have a nice aside and talk, mano a mano, have a little bit of fun here.
Absolutely.
So being that it's a Super GG episode, let's do the last two things that we need to. Freebies, if this gets posted before the next episode comes out, Payday 2 is for free over on the Epic Game Store. And guys, I didn't do any other research. My bad. Payday 2, I don't know how to describe it other than it's a robbery simulator where you and your friends go and work as a team to rob a bank or other place.
And there's DLC that coincides with our video game homework for
Hotline Miami.
Miami, yeah, where you get to play as Jacket.
But I guess there's a lot of DLC for that game. And Alex says it's completely different from what it was 5 years ago. So check it out. It's for free right now. And Payday 3 is coming out later this year. So get the free stuff while you can. All right, that'll take us to our one last thing. And this week's one last thing is brought to you by, hopefully Alex doesn't get arrested. Yeah, I am honestly concerned that he might have too much fun while he's in LA. But, kudos.
Well, it's not Vegas, so we'll find out about it.
But kudos to those guys. Hopefully they're able to have some fun here and enjoy some demos. Maybe bring us back some free stuff.
Ooh, freebies for us would be nice.
Right. So my one last thing for this week is going to be, I can't say it enough, but I think I'm like 70 hours in One Piece Odyssey. Maybe I'm at 80 at this point. I feel like I've done nothing. It just never ends. Every time I'm like, okay, I think this is over. They're like, oh, but here's another 7 bounties and 4 side quests that you should do. And I'm like, I'm going to do it. All right. Alec, what have you got for this week?
Oh, well, just my regular update on Yakuza Like a Dragon. I'm out of prison, finally.
Oh, how's your hair?
Oh, my man. It's so bad.
To see Ichiban go from such a clean-cut looking individual to... Did he get his puffy hair already?
Yeah, he got his puffy hair, his perm.
Yeah, oh my gosh. That poor guy. I'm so happy. Okay. Well, looking forward to more updates on that too, as you slowly make your way into the adventure that Like a Dragon is. All right.
Slowly is right.
It's so long. All right. Here we go. And if you'd like to... Whoa. Nope. That's too far. All right. That'll be it for this week's episode of Super GG Radio. Before we go, you can find us on Twitter at Super GG Radio and twitch.tv/Super GG Radio, where Thursdays we like to host a podcast. Saturdays, Joel has family stuff, so he's probably not playing Vampire Survivor. Mondays, Alex is nearly done with GBZ Kakarot. You gotta watch some of the insanity that he gets up to, because he's close enough to the end where it seems like at any moment he might go Super Saiyan. And if that's not your speed, then Tuesdays Alex also has Dope Beats and Skater XL. So pop in, take a listen, take a look, just hang out with us. And if you'd like to reach us with questions or input, our email address is mail@superggradio.com. And provide us a review on iTunes or the podcast app of your choice. Thanks for listening, and good game, Alec.
Good game, Getty.
That's it. We don't have to say anything else.
Nope.
That's an episode. Mint it. Good night, everybody.
The blue is a